Hello there, my sleepy travelers. You've returned once again to the quiet paths of Middle-earth, where gentle winds whisper through tall grass and twilight lingers just a little longer than expected. Tonight, we begin a tale wrapped in wonder, wisdom, and quiet magic. A story that hums softly beneath the hills and echoes through the pages of ancient scrolls. This is not a tale of war or conquest, but of quiet power and unseen strength. It is the story of Gandalf, the Grey Pilgrim, the hidden fire cloaked in humble robes. So breathe slowly, deeply, and let your thoughts settle like falling leaves. Around you, the stars awaken in the dusky sky, and the lamps of the Shire begin to flicker on, one by one. The hearths are warm, the roads are still, and all is calm in the western lands. Now close your eyes if you wish, and follow me softly into the veiled corners of the world, where the secrets of the Astari wait to be gently uncovered. Let us begin our peaceful journey together. Now that you're nestled in comfort, let me tell you a little of what's to come, for the road ahead is quiet, but full of wonders. Tonight, we journey alongside Gandalf, not in the battles you've heard about, not in the thundering ride against the shadow, but in the silences between those moments. This is the story of the Grey Wanderer as you've never heard it before, a tale not of flame and fury, but of quiet choices, unseen strength, and mysteries long buried beneath the song of time. We shall wander back through the years to the days when the Astari first came to Middle-earth, cloaked in humility, sent by the Valar to aid, not rule. 5 came, but only 1 remained true to the light. And as we follow Gandalf's journey, we'll see how power is not always loud, and courage is not always clothed in armor. You'll hear of the secret fires that dwelt within him, the wisdom passed from the west, and the gentle bonds he formed with those who trusted him, hobbits, rangers, kings, even the mighty eagles. And yet, this journey will not rush. It will flow like a quiet stream at twilight, softly curving through the hills of memory and legend. We'll tread softly through forests where the stars shine like silver runes, and sit beside the wizard as he smokes his pipe and murmurs secrets to the wind. And if, along the way, your eyelids grow heavy, that is just as it should be. You may drift, wander, or dream. The story will carry you gently, whether you're listening with waking thoughts or with dreams beginning to stir. And if you find peace here, dear one, feel free to return again. Like the old tales passed from hearth to hearth, this one will be here waiting. You can always subscribe or visit again when the stars are out and your heart longs for the quiet paths of Middle-earth. Now then, let us step softly forward into the hidden history of Gandalf the Grey, a quiet fire and the hope of many, shall we? In a quiet corner of Middle-earth, far from the towers of men and the deep delvings of dwarves, there is a hill that rises gently from the earth, and atop that hill is a round door, green as the soft moss that creeps along the shaded stone. Behind it lives a hobbit, though our tale tonight does not rest with him. No, this is a tale of someone who once knocked upon that very door in a burst of unexpected adventure. A figure cloaked in gray, crowned with a wide-brimmed hat, and leaning always upon a weathered staff. He is known by many names: Mithrandir to the elves, Tharkun to the dwarves, Incarnus in the south, and Gandalf the Grey to most. But there is more to Gandalf than his stories reveal. Beneath his kind eyes and smoke-ring smiles lies a fire older than the mountains. For he was no ordinary wanderer, and his presence in Middle-earth was no mere chance. He was one of the Istari, beings sent from the west by the Valar, the guardians of the world, to guide without ruling, to inspire without commanding. 5 came, long ago, Saruman the White, most proud and learned, Radagast the Brown, gentle and beast-loving, and 2 others whose paths are veiled in shadow and mystery. But it was Gandalf, quiet and unassuming, who walked among the peoples of Middle-earth with the deepest care. He chose to walk on foot, to speak gently, and to stay ever close to those most overlooked by fate. He loved fireworks and storytelling. He laughed with hobbits and pondered with elves. He listened before he spoke. Yet when darkness gathered, as it always does, he stood with unwavering resolve, as if the light within him had been waiting all along. Our tale tonight is not of war, nor of dragons, nor of towering battles. It is of the quiet strength that Gandalf carried and the powers he rarely revealed. Powers not of domination, but of insight, of kindness, of resilience. And so, as the stars shimmer above the hills, we shall walk alongside him, not through the roaring clash of Helm's Deep or the broken stone of Moria, but along the hidden paths of his wisdom. We'll glimpse the fire that burned behind his gray eyes and the secrets he carried from across the sea, from the lands beyond mortal reach. Let the wind guide us, let the silence speak, and let us gently follow Gandalf through quiet woods and ancient lore, toward the heart of a mystery that begins not in might, but in kindness. Though Gandalf was known far and wide for his wisdom, his days, when not wrapped in peril or purpose, were often spent in the simplest of joys. And in this part of our tale, we drift into such a time, a quiet season between greater tides. He had returned once again to the rolling green of the Shire, not for mission or message, but for the comfort only hobbit holes and kettle fires could bring. Gandalf was no stranger to the winding lanes and ivy-covered stone walls. The hobbits, ever fond of routine and peace, welcomed him with cautious cheer, not for his tales of dragons or the mysteries beyond the mountains, but for his ability to fill the night air with laughter and color. On a gentle afternoon, long after the summer had begun to tip into golden autumn, Gandalf wandered the grassy paths beyond the hill. He held no staff this time, only a pipe carved from old wood and smooth with use. Wisps of silver smoke curled around him as he moved, as if the clouds themselves followed him in gentle reverence. He often paused to kneel beside a moss-covered stone or run his hand across the bark of a tree. One might think him lost in thought, but in truth, Gandalf was always listening to the world itself, to the hush between birdsong, to the sighing of the trees when no wind stirred, to the very breath of Middle-earth. Each morning began the same. He would rise before the sun and watch the light bloom across the fields. Then came a short walk into the woods, not far from Bag End, where he might stop at a quiet glade to sip from his waterskin and feel the earth beneath his palms. The world felt different here. Calmer, yes, but also alert. There was a stillness beneath the surface, like a slumbering thought. It was in the rustle of the leaves, even when no breeze passed. It was in the way the morning mist lingered a little longer near the stones carved with age-old runes, stones long forgotten by hobbits, but remembered by Gandalf. And then there was the hum, soft at first, barely more than a whisper. But Gandalf noticed it. He always did. It was one late afternoon, while sipping tea in a grove of silver-barked birches, that he noticed the hum had changed. No longer merely present, it seemed to be growing, reaching. A low vibration in the roots, a shimmering pull just at the edge of hearing, as though some voice, buried deep within the world itself, was slowly waking. He set his cup down. The light filtered through the leaves, casting dapples upon his cloak. Somewhere in the distance, a thrush sang, its melody sweet and slow, but off by a note, as if echoing something older. Gandalf murmured. There it is again. That night, he stayed beside the grove, rather than return to the warm hearths of Hobbiton. He laid down his cloak upon the moss, and leaned back, pipe in hand. The stars above were unusually bright, their reflections glimmering faintly on a nearby pond. And though his eyes appeared closed, Gandalf was not sleeping. He was waiting. In the Shire, seasons pass gently, but for those attuned to the subtle music of the world, even a breeze can carry a message. It was during these quiet days that Gandalf began to notice the subtle anomalies. A patch of sunflowers that bloomed in the shape of the white tree. A fox that paused and stared at him longer than any wild creature should, eyes gleaming with something almost knowing. And once, as he walked through the tall grass near the riverbank, he found a single perfect feather, silver and long, too grand for any bird known to these lands. It shimmered faintly under the moonlight. He turned it in his hand, eyes narrowing. Not one of Gwaihir's, he said softly, naming the great Windlord of the Eagles. And yet, he tucked the feather beneath his cloak and kept walking. Later, while sipping elderflower tea under the stars, Gandalf recalled words once spoken in Valinor, the land from which he and the other Istari had come. He thought of the white shores and the hidden powers given to each of them. Not all had been revealed, not all were meant to be. Yet now, the world was changing. Something stirred, not in shadow and fire, but in memory. And memories, Gandalf knew, could be just as powerful. He returned to the birch grove the following day. It was there he began to sketch old runes in the earth with his staff, symbols from an ancient tongue that very few still understood. He wasn't casting a spell, not yet. He was asking a question. That night, the wind came from the west, cooler than usual, and carrying with it the scent of rain mixed with something more, something distant and sweet, like the breath of forgotten ages. The trees creaked in welcome. The grass leaned gently as if bowing. Even the stars seemed to hold still, listening. Gandalf opened his eyes slowly. So it begins again, he whispered. But even then, even with the hush of mystery falling over the grove, he did not rush. For Gandalf knew that answers came only when they were ready to be found. He was patient. The world would speak in its own time. And so he stayed, breathing slowly, eyes half-lidded beneath the wide brim of his hat. The fire at his feet crackled softly. The feather beside him pulsed with a quiet glow. And somewhere, just beyond the edge of waking, the song of the world stirred once more. The birch grove remained still. The air hung thick with silence, but not the sort that signals emptiness. No, this was the kind of quiet that waits. The hush before an ancient truth stirs, or before forgotten songs begin once more to hum beneath the earth. Gandalf stayed in that place for 3 days. He did not summon magic, nor did he reach with the full strength of his being. He merely listened, and the world, in its own time, answered. It began with the moss At first glance, it seemed ordinary, soft, bright green, clinging to roots and stone. But one afternoon, as the sun cast long golden rays across the grove, Gandalf noticed something peculiar. A trail of moss had grown overnight in the exact spiral pattern of an elven glyph. Not a random twist of nature, but a deliberate curve, ancient, elegant, and unmistakably crafted. "Now what have we here?" he murmured. He bent closer, fingers tracing the spiral without disturbing it. It glowed faintly at his touch, not brightly, but like the warmth left behind by old sunlight, soaked deep into the ground. The runes were from an age even the eldest elves seldom spoke of, a time when the Valar still walked openly and the stars were new. The very next morning, as the mist clung to the tree trunks like gentle shawls, Gandalf wandered toward the edge of the forest. There, where the trees thinned and the open fields of the Shire stretched toward the horizon, he saw lights, not torches nor fireflies. These lights shimmered without flicker, hovering just above the ground in soft blues and greens, drifting slowly like snowflakes on a windless night. They formed no paths, but they gathered where he walked like companions drawn to something old and familiar. Gandalf paused and tilted his head, smiling faintly. "So, you remember me?" he whispered. "Even now." He did not chase them. Instead, he followed slowly, allowing them to dance around his boots and drift through his cloak like dream threads. They led him not to the mountains, nor to deep caverns, but to a forgotten pond, so small it would never appear on any map, even in Elrond's vast libraries. It was here that the wind changed, soft and circular, as though the pond itself had drawn a breath. The surface shimmered, but not from ripples or wind. Within the water, reflections did not follow the world above. Instead of trees and clouds, Gandalf saw towers of white stone crowned with stars. Ships sailed on golden seas. A great hall glowed with silver light beneath a twilight sky where beings of light walked in silence. He did not look away. His staff rested beside him. His hands were folded, not in spell work, but in reverence. For what stirred here was not of his making. It was the breath of the world, the memory of the West, whispering softly through the veil. And still, the world answered in gentler ways. Animals, usually cautious of men, even those who wandered gently, began to gather. A stag, tall and silver gray, watched him from the edge of the glade. A fox lay curled beside a root and did not flee when Gandalf passed. Even the birds no longer scattered at his approach. They seemed to recognize something ancient in him, something beneath the robe and the hat and the pipe. But the most curious visitor came on the fifth night. The forest was silver with starlight, and Gandalf sat beneath a leaning elm, warming his hands by a crackling fire. He had just begun to hum an old tune from across the sea when the trees grew still and a figure stepped through the shadows. She was cloaked in blue, her hair as pale as the moon, her eyes older than the hills. She did not speak right away. She simply watched, the firelight dancing across her face, which was both young and ancient all at once. Gandalf did not rise, but he smiled. "I thought I might see you again," he said quietly. She nodded as though acknowledging a long-delayed meeting. "The winds have turned," she said, voice like the ringing of distant bells. "The earth remembers." The lights stir once more. Gandalf's eyes twinkled. "So they do. I felt them. I heard their whisper." "You are not forgotten, Mithrandir," she said, "nor are your kind without purpose." He said nothing to that, not yet. Instead, he gestured toward the fire. She knelt, gracefully, and together they sat without words for a time, letting the stars speak. When she finally spoke again, it was not with answers, but with a single name, whispered into the flames. Olorin. Gandalf closed his eyes, not in weariness, but in memory. That name, it had not been spoken aloud in Middle-earth for many ages. It was the name he had borne in the West, before he came to this world cloaked in gray. It meant dreamer in the tongue of the Valar, and it reminded him of who he had been and why he had come. Why now? He asked. The woman gazed into the fire. Because the balance is shifting. The shadows move, and the world strains to hold its shape. But your light, subtle as it may be, is not yet spent. He chuckled gently. Subtle indeed, a light hidden beneath many layers of old cloth. And yet, she smiled, it burns all the same. She left before the dawn, vanishing into the silver fog. Whether she was elf or Maya, or something older still, Gandalf did not know. But her presence lingered in the grove, like the scent of lavender long after the flower is gone. That morning the lights returned, brighter now, more numerous. They circled the pond in slow spirals, like stars dancing in water. Gandalf stood beside them, his hand resting lightly on the silver feather he had carried for days. He still said nothing. There was no need. The world was unfolding, revealing itself layer by layer. The veil between past and present, between West and Middle-earth, had begun to thin, and at its center was Gandalf, gray, weathered, and kind, who had always known that the greatest powers did not roar or blaze, but whispered gently through time. He turned back toward the Shire. There was no rush. The mystery would reveal itself, not in haste, but in harmony. And Gandalf, as always, would walk alongside it, not as master, but as guide. The morning came quiet and gray, with a low mist settled upon the fields like a heavy woolen blanket. It dulled sound, softened edges, and wrapped the world in stillness. Gandalf walked the woodland paths at the edge of the Shire, his staff tapping gently against the roots and earth. Not in haste, not with purpose, but as one who listens with every footfall, listens to the trees, the stones, the very memory of the ground beneath him. He had long known that Middle-earth spoke, not with voices, but with the subtle signs most had long forgotten how to hear. And on this day, the earth whispered louder than it had in many seasons. There, tucked behind a fold in the land where few hobbits wandered, stood a single ancient stone. It was not tall nor grand, and from afar looked like any other moss-covered boulder. But as Gandalf approached, he paused, his breath catching in a moment of unexpected stillness. The stone was warm, not from sunlight, for the day was overcast and cool, nor from fire, for there had been none, but it radiated a quiet, pulsing heat that moved through the air like a heartbeat. Gandalf knelt, brushing aside the moss with careful fingers. Beneath the green velvet was not bare stone, but something etched, runes worn and shallow, their meaning dulled with age but not entirely lost. He traced them slowly, not with urgency, with reverence. Valaraukar, he whispered to himself. The word trembled in the air, stirring the mist like breath upon a mirror. Balrog. But why here? This was not Moria, not the dark deeps of the mountains where flame and shadow slumbered. This was the Shire, gentle and green, and yet the name was carved purposefully alongside older symbols, ones Gandalf recognized not from study, but from memory, symbols of the West, of the Valar. He leaned back, sitting upon the damp grass, pipe unlit between his fingers. The runes were not a warning. They were a seal, a memory etched into the land, a sign left behind for eyes like his. The feather he had carried for days, silver, long, delicate as moonlight, trembled gently in his pocket. He drew it out. As it neared the stone, the runes flared softly, not bright, but clear, as though light passed from feather to earth, reawakening something that had long slumbered. Gandalf did not flinch. He simply watched. And then the vision came, not like a dream, not like a voice, but as a breath of memory that was not entirely his own. He saw a figure cloaked in white, standing at the edge of the Undying Lands, looking back at the shores of Middle-earth. Not Sauron, not Saruman, not even Radagast. It was himself, or what he had once been, before he bore the name Gandalf, Olorin, the Maya, a being of light once cloaked in humility, now held in a mirror not of water, but of spirit. The vision shimmered, folding time like parchment. He saw himself stepping onto the shores of Middle-earth, not with pride, but with quiet trepidation, not to rule, but to serve, to guide, to walk among those who still had freedom in their hearts. The feather brightened once more, and in its soft glow, a second image flickered, brief and beautiful. A ring, not of gold, nor of power to dominate, but of flame. Inner flame, quiet and constant, Narya, the ring of fire, Círdan's gift, a burden and a blessing. And with that memory, another truth unfolded, gentle as a flower blooming at dusk. The ring had not granted Gandalf power. It had amplified what was already within him, the strength to resist despair, the warmth to kindle hope in others, the fire not to consume, but to illuminate the path when darkness grew thickest. His role was never to defeat evil by might, but to remind the world of its own strength, to be a light others could follow when all seemed lost. He stood slowly, the mist lifting around him. The stone's glow faded, the runes now dim once more. But they had served their purpose. A door had opened, not to a place, but to deeper understanding, to self-awareness that had waited quietly in the corners of his heart. He turned toward the woods, eyes softer now, his brow lined not with worry, but with wisdom. The mysteries of the Astari had never been in their might, not in the staffs they carried, nor the veils of power that cloaked them. No, the true mystery lay in their restraint, their choice to walk quietly among mortals, their choice to inspire instead of command, to lift hearts instead of wield swords. And this, Gandalf knew, was what the feather had shown him, a reminder of who he was, who he had always been. He began walking again, not toward any known destination, but simply onward. Birds sang softly overhead. The wind had shifted, carrying the scent of pine and something older still. He tucked the feather back into his cloak. Ahead, the path curved toward a grove he had not visited in decades. There were more secrets waiting there. But now he was ready. After his quiet discovery in the glade, where the rune-carved stone pulsed with warmth, Gandalf did not return to the heart of the Shire. Not yet. Instead, he wandered toward a familiar hilltop, one he had visited before, but not in many years. It was a place far from hobbit holes and well-trodden paths, where the land rose into a gentle swell and opened up to the wide sky, unbroken and clear. A lone beech tree stood there, old and silver-limbed, its roots wrapped like ancient fingers around stones half swallowed by the earth. It was the kind of place where silence was not empty, but full of memory. There, Gandalf sat cross-legged upon a flat stone, warmed by the last light of day. He placed his staff beside him and leaned back slightly, letting the breeze brush his gray hair and whisper through the folds of his cloak. The silver feather, now tucked into the inner pocket of his robes, hummed faintly but did not call for attention. He had seen what he needed to see. Now it was time to feel. He lit his pipe, not for comfort, but for rhythm. Soft puffs of fragrant smoke rising lazily to the sky as his thoughts wandered, not rushed, not tangled, just drifting like the curling smoke itself. For many years, Gandalf had known that he was more than he appeared. He had known his true name, Olorin, whispered only in the west. He had known that his body, the shape of an old man, hunched and travel-worn, was only a vessel. But knowing and understanding are not the same. Today, understanding had stirred, slow and deep, like an old tree's roots shifting beneath the soil. It was not power that marked his purpose. It was choice. He chose humility, though he had once walked the gardens of Lorien in radiance. He chose patience, though he could have called storms from the sky. He chose to light fires for others, even if it meant burning slowly, steadily, without acclaim. The Istari had come to Middle-earth not to rule, but to guide, to offer counsel, not command. Yet some had forgotten this. Saruman, proud and brilliant, had once walked beside him. Now his path lay twisted and shadowed. Radagast had wandered too far into the woods and forgotten the call of his mission. Only Gandalf remained steady, even when the path seemed uncertain. And now, in this gentle quiet, he understood why. Because he loved Middle-earth, not in some grand, sweeping way, but in the small details, the feel of warm bread and cool stone, the laugh of a hobbit over second breakfast, the glint of starlight on a still lake, the gentle rustle of a cloak just before dawn. He had not come to save the world. He had come to preserve its wonder. And that, he realized, was where his strength truly lived, not in magic cast from a staff, but in the courage to believe in the good of others. He thought of Frodo, of how the smallest of folk had carried the greatest burden. He thought of Samwise, of how quiet loyalty could shine brighter than a sword. And in these reflections, something softened in him, a quiet warmth spreading beneath his ribs, not pride, not triumph, something deeper, peace. He pulled his cloak tighter as the evening chill settled in, the first stars appearing one by one, like ancient lanterns kindling across the sky. And as he watched, he remembered a time before time, when he had stood beside the shores of Valinor and listened to the music of the Ainur. That song still echoed within him. He had brought a note of it to Middle-earth. Not all remembered the song, but it still played. In the rustle of leaves, in the laughter of children, in the courage of unlikely heroes. He reached into his robes and drew out a small, leather-bound journal. Its pages were worn, edges smudged with soot and pipe ash. He opened to a blank leaf and began to write, not quickly, not to record events, but to mark this feeling, this realization. The fire that burns within me was not kindled by power, but by hope. I was sent not to rule the shadows, but to remind the light how to shine. He closed the book gently, letting it rest beside him. The wind was rising slightly cooler now, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and far-off mountain air. He closed his eyes, and in the dark behind his lids, he saw again the vision of himself, Olorin in white, standing at the edge of the sea, looking eastward, not with sorrow, with promise, a promise he was still fulfilling. As he opened his eyes, The stars overhead shimmered like watchful eyes. He stood slowly, joints creaking like old hinges, and gathered his staff. There was more to see, more to learn, but tonight the road could wait. For what he had discovered was not a destination. It was a knowing that would guide every step forward. He turned back toward the path that would wind down the hill and back to the world of firelight and friends. Not because he was done seeking, but because he was ready to carry the mystery with him, no longer as a question, but as a truth. And that, my sleepy fellow, is how great wisdom grows, not in sudden thunder, but in quiet recognition, in the gentle blooming of understanding beneath starlit skies. Let us follow him onward, quietly, curiously, and with wonder in our hearts. The morning after his quiet reflection beneath the stars, Gandalf rose early with the pale blush of dawn warming the sky. His steps were unhurried as he descended the hill, his staff tapping softly along the damp earth. There was no clear destination before him, only a sense that the road would provide what it must. He had not walked long when the wind shifted, bringing with it a familiar scent, pine and fire, distant hearth smoke mingled with moss. It guided his path toward the woods bordering the northern edge of the Shire, a place where few hobbits wandered and fewer still lingered after nightfall. There, in a clearing dappled with the soft golden light of mid-morning, sat a figure beneath an ash tree. Clad in worn leather and a gray-green cloak, the figure was sharpening a curved blade, not out of urgency, but as one might polish silver on a quiet afternoon. He looked up as Gandalf approached, and a faint smile crept across his face. "Long have the trees waited to see you pass this way again, Mithrandir," said the man in a low, even voice. Gandalf smiled gently. "And you, Halvaran, still speak for the woods?" The ranger gave a modest shrug. "Only when they ask." They sat together in companionable silence for a time, watching the clouds drift above the canopy. Halvaran was one of the Dunedain, descended from Númenorian blood, though his life was now lived in the hush of wild places. He had always listened more than he spoke, and Gandalf had long valued the quiet wisdom he carried. "There is something stirring," Halvaran said finally, his gaze never leaving the treetops. "Not of shadow, not yet. But the earth listens differently these days. The stars whisper in older tongues." Gandalf nodded slowly, his thoughts still touched by the memory of the glowing runestone and the feather that hummed with unseen song. "I have felt it too," Gandalf murmured, a murmur beneath the stillness, not warning but invitation, as though something long hidden begins to turn its face toward the light again. Halvaran gave a thoughtful hum. "The land remembers the Maiar, though few know their names. You walk among them still, though they no longer see it." Gandalf chuckled lightly, brushing a finger across the brim of his hat. "And perhaps that is well. There is more strength in being underestimated than many realize." The two shared a quiet moment of understanding before Halvaran stood and placed a hand over his heart. "Whatever path you follow, Mithrandir, let it be walked in peace. My fire is yours, should your feet wander near again. And your stories always welcome at mine," Gandalf replied warmly. With that, he continued on, his steps turning eastward now, toward the rolling hills that led beyond Bree and into the wildlands. As the sun arced toward its zenith, he found another traveler waiting along the edge of a wooded glen, a tall figure cloaked in twilight blue, with silver hair braided down one shoulder and eyes that seemed to carry both laughter and sorrow in equal measure. Lomelindis, Gandalf greeted, recognizing the elf immediately. I thought you had passed west with the others. Not yet, she replied with a soft smile. There are stories still to witness, and besides, I miss the scent of pipe smoke on the breeze. They sat beneath a birch tree, where soft leaves whispered overhead. Gandalf offered her a small clay pipe, and she declined with a playful wave of her hand. Lomelind was a bard of the House of Finarfin, once a singer in the courts of Galadriel herself. But she had long chosen the wandering road, weaving tales into song and melody, her voice carrying echoes of the undying lands. You seek understanding, she said, though he had not yet spoken of it. I seek remembrance, Gandalf replied, of what I was and what I was meant to be, not as power, but as presence, as purpose. Lomelinde's eyes softened, and she reached into her satchel, retrieving a slender scroll bound in velvet. She unrolled it with delicate fingers, revealing a map not of terrain, but of constellations, familiar stars drawn beside runes in ancient script. This was given to me by a Maya long ago, she said, in a time when the skies spoke more freely. Each star here, she pointed, marks a moment when something of great importance was chosen, not forced. That is their true magic, choice, woven through time. Gandalf studied the map in silence, letting the stars speak to him in their quiet way. You are one of those stars, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Not for what you can do, but for what you choose not to. That is the wisdom the Valar hoped you would carry. He did not reply at first, only nodded slowly, folding the scroll again with reverence. They did not speak of farewells. Elves, especially the oldest of them, understood that all meetings beneath the stars were both endings and beginnings. As night fell, Gandalf walked alone once more, though his steps were lighter now, his heart carrying the gentle weight of remembered truths. Just before midnight, he passed a ridge where a single lantern glowed, a quiet sign of welcome. A small campfire crackled beside a worn stone well, and beside it sat a woman with silver-threaded hair wrapped in a deep forest shawl. She did not look up as he approached, but she spoke his name, Olorin. His breath caught. It had been long since anyone had spoken that name aloud. You knew me before the gray robes, he said softly. I remember you in white, she replied, looking up at last. Her eyes were ancient, though she wore no crown, no sigil of the West, only the look of one who had watched ages pass like drifting leaves. Will you share your fire? Gandalf asked. I already did, she said gently, gesturing to the warmth between them. They spoke little. Sometimes the soul does not need words, only proximity, only the knowing presence of another. But before she slept, she left him with a final thought. You are not here to unearth old powers. You are here to remind the world that it still has its own. Gandalf sat by the fire long after she had closed her eyes, letting her words settle like dew upon his mind. The road had given him much this day, not allies, not weapons, but reminders of wisdom, of choice, of love for a world still growing. He did not need to be more than he already was. He only needed to walk gently, with eyes open, and offer a light where shadows lingered. And so he did, my sleepy fellow. With every step forward, his staff glowed not brighter, but steadier. For the power of the Astari was never in thunder or flame. It was in quiet courage, in chosen kindness, and in the trust that when needed most, the right hand would be there, not to rule, but to lift. Now let us walk on, softly, steadily, for the night is not yet over, and the stars still whisper their songs. Night had settled like velvet across the hills. The wind had quieted, and the hush of twilight gave way to the deeper silence of true evening. Gandalf, having walked many miles that day, came upon a grove where soft moss padded the roots of silver-barked trees. There, a fire flickered low, not blazing, but glowing gently like a lantern set before an old storybook. Beside it sat two familiar companions, Halvaran, the ranger whose voice rarely rose above a murmur, and Lomelind, the elven bard whose song had once stirred the leaves of Lothlorien. Gandalf smiled and lowered himself beside them. The fire popped softly as the three sat in easy quiet, the kind of silence shared only by those who understand that words, when needed, will find their way. Above them, the stars spread wide, ancient and gleaming. Halvaran shifted first. They say Varda placed the stars as beacons, not only for elves, but for any who wander. Gandalf looked up, eyes soft, and they've never ceased in their watching. Lomelanda gave a thoughtful nod and reached into the leather pouch at her side. She drew forth a thin, circular disc of polished wood marked with runes that glowed faintly in the firelight. "A tale from the elder days," she said. "Would you like to hear one?" Halvaran raised a brow. "Do stars still whisper in the old tongue?" Lomelanda's eyes twinkled. They never stopped. "And so," she began, "in the first age," she whispered, "before the moon had fully risen and the sun knew its path, there was a Maya named Alcarin, not mighty like Melian, nor proud like Sauron, quiet instead. He walked among starlight, learning the shape of dreams. It is said he crafted the wind that carries memory, the breeze that brings forgotten names back to the lips of wanderers. Alcarin never fought wars. He mended the broken notes in Iluvatar's music, tiny imperfections that no one else noticed. And so, the world grew more beautiful without even knowing why. After the great sundering of the elves, Alcarin faded from lore. But some say he is still present, whenever a gentle word is spoken in the dark, whenever a flickering candle calms a frightened child. Not every Maya was meant for grandeur. Some were meant for grace." The fire crackled softly as her tale faded into the night air. Gandalf's eyes had not left the stars. "Many believe power must be loud," he said, "but some of the strongest voices are never heard, only felt." Halvaran glanced toward the sky. "The world forgets that silence, too, can speak." Lomelinda smiled gently. "Then perhaps we should let another story speak now." Gandalf reached into his own satchel. From within, he drew not a book, but a small stone, oval, pale, with silver veins running through it like threads of moonlight. "I found this many ages ago, near the shores of Mithlond," he said, "and it spoke, not in words, but in memory." He held it close to the fire, and the stone shimmered faintly. "There was a time," he began, "when the Istari first arrived in Middle-earth. We were cloaked, not just in form, but in humility. We knew little of the paths we would walk, only that we must not rule nor dominate. Our purpose was to kindle hope. But not all who arrive with light carry the patience to tend it." He paused, eyes distant. "There were 5 of us," he continued, voice softer now. "Kurumo, who became Saruman, sought knowledge like a burning fire. Iwendil, Radagast, who found his heart in birdsong and beasts. Alatar and Palando, who ventured east and vanished into lands even the elves do not name. And then there was Olorin. He chuckled gently. That was me, the one who loved stories more than spells, who wept with the grieving and sat with the old. I never believed I would carry a staff, only a listening ear. Halvarin leaned forward, brows furrowed. And yet, you became the most trusted of them all, because I remained the least certain, Gandalf replied with a twinkle. Doubt, when held gently, leaves room for compassion. The three fell into silence again, and above them, a shooting star traced the sky like a silver whisper. Then Lomelinde began to hum, a melody older than words, soft and slow. The trees seemed to sway with it, and the fire shifted its rhythm to match. After some time, Halvarin spoke again. There is a tale we tell in the north about a man who carried no sword, only a lantern. He walked into haunted lands, not to fight the ghosts, but to light their way home. They say his name was lost to time, but his lantern still glows on stormy nights. Gandalf smiled deeply. That is no mere tale, that is memory, for even ghosts deserve peace. A hush settled once more, not from weariness, but reverence. The stars had brightened, the fire dimmed, and somewhere deep within the trees an owl sang a low, echoing note, like a lullaby for the earth itself. Gandalf rose at last, brushing off his cloak. The lore we share, he said, is not to teach others what to know. It is to remind ourselves of who we are. Lomelinda and Halvarin both stood with him, their eyes calm and clear. The world does not need louder heroes, she said. It needs gentler ones. And with that, they parted, not with farewells, but with soft nods, like stars bowing to the moon. Gandalf continued on, his steps light but full, as though each story shared beneath the stars had added to his strength, not through magic, but through meaning. And so, dear sleepy fellow, if you ever walk beneath the stars and feel the whoosh of something watching, not with menace, but with memory, know this: Middle-earth remembers, and you too are part of its story. Let the stars sing you softly into dreams. There is more ahead, but tonight we rest beneath the ancient sky. The dawn had not yet broken. Instead, the sky held that soft silver pause between night and morning, a hush when the world holds its breath. Gandalf walked slowly along a winding ridge of stone, high above the green plains of Rohan, though his gaze was not on the land below, but toward the sky above, where stars still lingered like old companions, reluctant to say farewell. The memory of the stories shared beneath the stars stayed with him, warm, like a lantern glowing behind his ribs. Each tale had added another thread to the tapestry he now carried in his heart, a tapestry woven of lore, love, and the mysterious call that had long haunted him since the days of Valinor. At the base of the ridge, a narrow path descended toward a quiet glen hidden between folds of stone. And there, wrapped in mist and morning silence, waited the last piece of the puzzle. A stone circle, older than Rohan, older than Gondor, stood at the heart of the glen. Moss grew thick on the ancient stones, and ivy curled like sleepy fingers along their base. Birds had not yet stirred, and even the breeze felt reverent. Gandalf paused just before stepping into the circle. He removed his hat, placing it gently upon a nearby rock, and leaned upon his staff, not out of weariness, but in stillness. From within the center, a faint hum began to rise. Not loud, not sudden, only a soft vibration, like a memory stirring from a long sleep. Gandalf stepped into the ring, and the world changed. There was no flash of light, no gust of wind, only a shifting of the very air, like slipping into a dream already in progress. The sky dimmed, but not with shadow. Instead, the color of the world seemed to soften, as if viewed through flowing water. The glen became translucent, timeless. Then, voices, not spoken aloud, but gently blooming within his mind, not language, but understanding. He saw the 5 figures once again. The Astari, not in flesh, not as they were, but as they had been when first sent, when their spirits were still clad in light rather than gray wool. Saruman, tall and radiant with knowledge. Radagast, gentle-eyed and surrounded by the rustling of wings. Alatar and Palando, the blue wizards, shadowed by distance, speaking of far deserts and silent stars. And himself, Olorin, most humble of them all. They stood in a circle, gazing outward, not inward, looking at the world they had sworn to guide. Gandalf closed his eyes, and he understood. They had not been chosen because of power, but because of restraint. Not for dominance, but for humility. And not to lead armies, but to tend the flickering flame of hope. Each of them had walked a path, some lost, some tangled, some unfinished, but the mission had never been to control, only to serve. In this moment of clarity, the mystery he had sought, of his own place, of the fading magic, of the unseen design, unfolded like a slow blossom. He saw how the valor had sent them not to change fate, but to walk beside those who would, to offer wisdom, not commands, to show that even in the darkest hour, light could be kind, not cruel. And he saw something more. Within himself, deep and quiet, was a power unlike the fire and storms others feared. His power was in stillness, in patience, in listening. The hidden power of Gandalf was in bearing the weight of hope without breaking. He opened his eyes, the vision faded, but the understanding remained. The stones stood quiet once more. The mist had lifted, and morning light spilled slowly into the glen like honey on linen. Gandalf put his hat back on and smiled, a small, knowing smile that reached all the way to his heart. And far away, as if in answer, an eagle called across the sky. He left the glen behind, traveling not with urgency, but with purpose. Each step was lighter now, though the world remained as complex and wounded as ever. His path had not become easier, but it had become clearer. When he returned to the place where Lomalinda and Halvarin waited, they rose wordlessly, sensing that something within him had changed. They did not ask what he had seen. They only offered warm bread and shared silence. And as they sat together once more, with the last stars winking out behind them and the warmth of the sun beginning to stir the leaves, Gandalf turned his gaze westward, not with longing, but with peace, For he knew now that magic did not always reveal itself in spells and spectacles. Sometimes it lived in the gentlest of hands, the softest of words, and the quiet strength to walk beside others, never in front. He had not unraveled the mystery to command it. He had simply become part of it, and Middle-earth felt it. The air hummed slightly around him, not with power, but with harmony. A single white flower bloomed quietly beside his staff, and he chuckled softly. "That'll do," he whispered. "That'll do." So now, sleepy fellow, as the last page of this night's tale turns, know this: Gandalf's power was never in what he could summon, but in what he chose to hold back. In the paths he walked with humility, in the friends he guided without pride, in the stories he listened to more than the ones he told. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest magic of all was his understanding of when to stay and when to simply walk on. Let this truth rest gently with you as the stars return to their watch above and the world sighs into another quiet breath of night. Sleep well, dear listener. We are never truly alone, not when the wind remembers and the fire still burns soft and steady. And so the tale of Gandalf's quiet path, of wisdom unspoken and mysteries gently unfolded, begins to settle like the final notes of a lullaby. The world of Middle-earth, with its tall mountains and whispering trees, its ancient echoes and soft winds, holds more stories than stars in the sky. But tonight, we walked alongside one that didn't seek the noise of grand battle or the clamor of crown and sword. No, this story was a quiet one, a tale of understanding rather than dominance, of choosing gentleness over glory. We wandered with Gandalf not in the fire of his might, but in the hush of his purpose. We saw what others did not, the strength behind his silence, the clarity behind his steady gaze, the power in walking with those who must bear the weight of destiny. For sometimes, the truest magic lies in guiding others without overshadowing them, in offering a hand, a word, a presence that reassures even in the darkest hour. As the stars return to their places above and the hush of night deepens, let your thoughts drift gently with them. Remember the quiet glow of the glen where Gandalf stood, the way the mist curled around the stones, and how understanding did not arrive with thunder, but with stillness. Perhaps the world you live in moves fast, speaks loud, and demands more than it gives. But not here, not now. In this corner of Middle-earth, time slows. Here you are held, you are safe, you are allowed to rest. Let the images stay with you as you slip into sleep. Stars mirrored on a still lake, Gandalf seated by a fire, with friends who speak in hushed voices, and the soft rhythm of a walking staff tapping stone as he moves forward, never rushing, never turning away from the path. The mysteries of the Astari were never meant to be unraveled in haste. They live in the heart of stories passed by firelight, in the memory of trees, in the quiet choice to be kind even when strength is easy. And now, dear one, you carry a piece of that mystery too. Close your eyes, let the world fall away like mist before the morning sun. You are part of the story now, woven into the tapestry that spans the ages. Gandalf's footsteps grow softer on the path ahead, The fire dims, and the night is yours. Sleep well, my sleepy fellow.